These are the results of a functional behavior assessment of a typically developing 3-year-old female. She was referred by her parents for tantrum behavior that was occurring in the home and interfering with her daily activities as well as those of the family. Indirect assessment was collected, and first there was an interview with her father to gather some anecdotal information regarding consequences and antecedents that have been observed with the behavior, as well as some background information about the child and her daily schedule. Then we gave the father a functional behavior screening tool to fill out, which was a series of yes or no questions. And these yes or no questions were assigned a value to come up with a total score and determine if the behavior was likely socially reinforced or automatically reinforced. This is a graph of those results. You can see that attention and access scored about an 8 and escape about a 7. Sensory and pain attenuation scored a 0. So this shows us that the behavior is likely socially reinforced rather than automatically reinforced. However, the results are inconclusive because, as you can see, there is not one clear maintaining variable of the behavior. Next, we had the dad fill out a questionnaire about behavior functions. For this checklist, the father gave a score of 0, 1, 2, or 3 to a series of questions, and then a total score was given for the likely maintaining variables of attention, escape, non-social, physical, and tangible. This is a graph of those results. Tangible scored about a 12, escape and attention about an 8, and non-social and physical scored a 0. So this again shows that the behavior is likely socially reinforced. But these results are also inconclusive because, again, it's not clear that there is one likely function of the behavior. So because these results were inconclusive, direct assessment data was collected. This data was collected via scatterplot, continuous ABC observation, and checklist ABC data. So during 120 minutes of continuous observation over 2 sessions, there were 6 occurrences of tantrum behavior. And from those 6 occurrences, we were able to determine the average duration of the behavior for that period of time, and it was about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. This is a graph of the duration of each of the occurrences of tantrum behavior during the continuous observation period. So you can see that the longest tantrum lasted for about 5 minutes and the shortest for just around 1 minute. The next graph shows us the number of tantrums that occurred over the during the ABC checklist data. So across those 4 days, there were 4 days of ABC checklist data. There were 5 tantrums on the first day, 4 on the second, about 5 on the third, and then only 1 on the fourth. And then the next couple of graphs show us information about antecedents related to the behavior, and this was gathered from the continuous ABC data as well as the checklist ABC data. So there were 21 occurrences of tantrum behavior between the ABC checklist data and the continuous observation data. So that is where these numbers come from. When you look at this graph, these are the antecedents. And as you can see, being denied an activity was the antecedent that occurred the most at right around 10 times. And then next was the presence of the child's sister, which was at about 3 times. And then a demand or request from an adult was about 2 times. And then the denial of a child-directed request was about 1 time. And then this graph shows the percentages. So the percentage of time out of those 21 occurrences, what percentage of the time did this particular antecedent come before the behavior? So for denied an item or activity, it was around 70%. And all of the next highest is a demand or request from adult, and that is at right around 10%. And the presence of the sister is right around 10% as well. But you can see that the most common antecedent was being denied an activity or item. The next two graphs show us the consequences that were observed to occur during the ABC checklist data and the continuous observation data. So you can see that about 9 times the child was not given the desired item, and about 6 times she did receive the item or activity, and then about 3 times she received verbal attention, and about 3 times there was follow through with a demand or request. And then looking at the percentages, again, not given a desired item or activity was at about 50%. Being given the desired item or activity was at about a 30%. Verbal attention about a 20%. Follow through with demand or task about a 20%. So what this data shows us is that while not being given the item is the highest, receiving the item is the second highest. So the tantrum behavior is likely being intermittently reinforced by these two consequences. So after gathering the continuous data, a contingency space analysis was conducted, and this is a graph of the contingency space analysis. So what this graph shows us is how likely a consequence is to follow the problem behavior or other behaviors. So looking at this, you can see that access was 100% likely to follow the problem behavior. And attention was about 30% likely to follow other behaviors, and escape was just less than 20% likely to follow other behaviors. So what this shows us is that the problem behavior, tantrums, is likely being reinforced by gaining access to desired items. Next, a hypothesis test was conducted, and this was done by providing the child with periods of restricted access to preferred activities and then non-contingent access to those activities. And this graph shows those results, and you can see that when activities were restricted, tantrums occurred anywhere between 2 and 3 times for both sets of intervals where there was restricted access. And there was only 1 occurrence of tantrum behavior during the observation intervals when she was given non-contingent access to those items. So this again shows us that the tantrums are more likely to occur when she's being denied an item or activity. So access to those items is likely reinforcing the behavior, because when she has access to those items, the tantrums decrease. Next, we did a preference assessment just to see what items she prefers. So we did a multiple stimulus without replacement preference assessment. So she was presented with chocolate, cheese, bubbles, hug, and stickers. And of the times that chocolate was presented, she picked chocolate about 83% of the time. Next, cheese at just over 40%. Then bubbles, right around 30%. Hug, right around 20%, or right around 25%, and stickers right around 20%. So this shows us that chocolate is the most preferred item and stickers is the least. So to determine if one of those is reinforcing, we conducted a reinforcer assessment. in which she was asked the question, what is your last name? And during baseline, she was given no reinforcement for answering the question correctly. And as you can see, she was asked the question 5 times for each trial. And as you can see, when there was no reinforcement, she answered correctly about between 40 and 60% of the time. And then when she was given chocolate, that increased significantly, and she answered correctly between 80% and 90% of the time. And then again, when we returned to baseline, the percentage of time she answered correctly dropped and declined steadily to only about 20%. And then she was given stickers contingent on correct responses, and her responding correctly ranged from 40% to 60%, which is similar to her responding at baseline with no reinforcement. So this shows us that chocolate is likely a reinforcer for this child. Finally, we conducted an FA preference assessment. So for this preference assessment, the child was given 2 choices: tangibles only versus attention, and tangibles only versus attention only. The item that she selected most is considered highly preferred and therefore likely to be maintaining the behavior because she wants this preferred activity. The tangibles presented were stamps, Play-Doh, and coloring. Attention intangibles was doing a puzzle or playing a game with mom, and attention only was sitting with mom and doing nothing else. And these are the results of the FA preference procedure. So as you can see, tangibles and attention only scored about the same. Tangibles were selected 58.3% of the time, and attention only was selected at 33.3%, and attention intangibles was selected at 50% of the time. So these results are somewhat inconclusive because it's showing us that the tangibles and attention only seem to be relatively close in preference. And in the previous assessment procedures, attention was not showing up as high. So since all of the other assessment procedures are more in agreement that the behavior is being maintained by tangibles, we would conclude that tangibles is most likely the maintaining function of the behavior, and that attention, we're not really sure why attention showed up as it did in the FA preference assessment, because again, it didn't show up as a factor in the other procedures. So based on all of the data, the indirect assessments and the direct assessments collected, it is believed that this child's tantrum behavior is maintained by access to tangible items. Thank you.